April 18th, 1943. 9:34 in the morning, 500 feet above the jungle canopy of southern Bougainville, two Japanese Betty bombers cruise in tight formation with 6 Zero fighters holding station 1,000 feet above them. The lead bomber carries Admiral Yamamoto, the man who exactly 16 months earlier had planned the strike on Pearl Harbor. He is precisely on schedule. His itinerary was transmitted in code 5 days ago, and that code has been broken. Coming up at 400 miles an hour from below, hugging the treetops, invisible against the dark green terrain, are 16 twin-engined American fighters that have just flown 435 miles at wave-top height across open ocean, using nothing but dead-reckoning navigation and a specially fitted external fuel tank slung under each aircraft. The Japanese escorts see them at the last possible second. One of those escort pilots later recorded that the shapes climbing toward the formation did not look like fighters at all. They looked like something else, something with two bodies. Within 4 minutes, both bombers are burning in the jungle. Yamamoto is dead, and the aircraft that killed him carried a nickname the pilot who wrote the after-action report had used before, Shaun-do no Akuma, Two-Bodied Devil. That nickname was not born in the moments over Bougainville. By April 1943, it had already been circulating inside Japanese naval aviation reports for close to a year. It appears in captured squadron logs from Rabaul. It appears in an intelligence assessment from the 12th Air Fleet dated late 1942. It appears in personal letters that survived the war in family archives on Kyushu. And it names one specific aircraft, always the same aircraft, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, an aircraft that when it was first ordered by the United States Army Air Corps in June of 1937, almost no serving fighter pilot in the world genuinely believed could work at all. To understand why the Lightning terrified the men who flew against it, you have to understand what it was designed against. In 1937, the Army Air Corps issued a specification called Circular Proposal X-608, a document that asked American aircraft manufacturers to build something no one had ever quite built before. A fighter capable of climbing to 20,000 feet in 6 minutes. A fighter with a maximum level speed of at least 360 miles per hour, at a moment when most operational fighters in the world topped out closer to 300. And a fighter with the endurance to loiter over a target area at full power for a full hour after climbing to that altitude. Every serious aeronautical engineer who read the specification recognized immediately that no existing single-engine airframe could meet all three requirements simultaneously. The physics of the piston engines then available simply did not allow it. Something in the specification had to give. At Lockheed, a 27-year-old engineer named Clarence Johnson, known throughout the industry by his childhood nickname Kelly, refused to accept that trade-off. He proposed instead to build the aircraft around 2 engines rather than 1. Twin Allison V1710, liquid-cooled 12s, each turning a 3-bladed propeller in the opposite direction from the other to cancel out the torque that had killed so many pilots trying to horse a single powerful engine off the runway. Behind each engine sat a General Electric turbo supercharger, a rotating steel disc mounted in the tail boom that used the engine's own exhaust gases to force compressed air back into the intake at altitudes where ordinary aircraft simply lost power and fell out of the sky. The 2 engines sat in 2 separate fuselages, joined by a single wing and a single horizontal stabilizer running across the back. The pilot sat in a small, streamlined pod, suspended between the booms, with no propeller anywhere in his line of sight. It was a shape no fighter pilot in the world would immediately recognize as a fighter at all. And in the nose of that pod, Johnson placed something no other production fighter of the period possessed: 4 Browning 50 caliber machine guns and 1 Hispano 20mm cannon, all of them mounted in parallel, all of them firing straight ahead along the aircraft's line of flight. In a conventional single-engine fighter with guns mounted in the wings, the weapons had to be angled inward to converge at a single point roughly 300 yards ahead of the aircraft. Beyond that convergence point, the bullet streams spread apart. Short of it, the bullets crossed and diverged. A pilot had exactly one narrow band of range at which his full firepower actually landed on the same spot. In the Lightning, that limitation simply did not exist. Every round from every gun travelled in the same straight line for as far as it flew. A P-38 pilot could open fire on an enemy aircraft from 1,000 yards out and hit it with the concentrated weight of 5 weapons landing on the same square foot of aluminum. No other Allied fighter of the war had that capability. No Axis fighter of the war had it either. The first Japanese pilot to face this weapon in serious numbers was a young lieutenant named Saburo Sakai, one of the finest fighter pilots his country ever produced, credited with 64 aerial victories across a career that took him from the skies over China to the beaches of Iwo Jima. In his memoir published nearly 2 decades after the war, Sakai wrote plainly about what the appearance of the P-38 over the Solomon Islands in late 1942 meant to the men flying against it. His countrymen, he explained, had grown accustomed to fighting the American Wildcat, an aircraft the Zero could outturn, outclimb, and outrun at almost every altitude below 15,000 feet. The Lightning could do none of the things the Wildcat did, and that was precisely the problem. It could not outturn a Zero. It did not need to. It could climb through a Zero's altitude ceiling and then dive back down at speeds no Zero pilot could match. It could open fire from ranges no Zero pilot expected. And critically, when a Japanese pilot successfully damaged one of its engines, the Lightning simply feathered the propeller on that side and flew home on the other one. That last detail matters more than any single tactical advantage. Across the Pacific, from the Aleutians to Australia, the survival of a fighter pilot was ordinarily measured in the reliability of a single engine. Take out that engine, and the aircraft was finished. The pilot either bailed out over hostile jungle or ditched in open ocean, and in either case the empire he served considered him effectively lost. The Lightning changed that arithmetic completely. Japanese pilots who successfully shot up a P-38 over the Solomons repeatedly reported watching the damaged aircraft simply turn and cruise steadily away, its remaining engine untroubled, its pilot alive, its guns still perfectly capable of returning tomorrow. In 3 separate documented cases from 1943 alone, the same American pilot returned to combat within a week of an engagement in which his Japanese opponent had reported him confirmed shot down. There is a specific German phrase for the psychological state this created in an enemy pilot force, but the Japanese pilots who lived through it in the Pacific simply began, quietly and without official sanction, refusing patrol assignments they knew would put them into contact with the Two-Bodied Devil. The Germans had their own name for it. Der Gabelschwanz Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. Luftwaffe pilots flying the newer marks of the Messerschmitt 109 over North Africa in 1943, and later over southern Europe in 1944, encountered the Lightning under conditions completely different from those of the Pacific War, but the operational reaction inside the Luftwaffe fighter arm was remarkably similar. Adolf Galland, the general who commanded the German day fighter force during the middle years of the war, and who had personally shot down more than 100 Allied aircraft himself, wrote after the war that P-38 formations operating out of Sardinia and southern Italy created a specific tactical problem German commanders never quite fully solved. The aircraft's range meant it could appear 400 miles behind the front. Its altitude ceiling meant Messerschmitts scrambled to intercept it, frequently had to climb into the same thin, cold air the Lightning was already flying comfortably inside. And its dive speed meant that a German pilot who chose to break off contact and dive away, the standard escape maneuver of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, discovered too often that the Lightning could catch him going down. Which brings the story back to the Yamamoto mission, because the specific tactical decision that made Operation Vengeance possible had nothing to do with Japanese naval intelligence and everything to do with an aircraft that could physically be somewhere it had no business being. When American cryptanalysts on Oahu decoded the itinerary of Yamamoto's inspection tour on April 14, 1943, the immediate operational problem was distance. The Admiral's route would take him past the southern tip of Bougainville, 435 miles from the nearest American airfield on Guadalcanal. No Allied fighter aircraft based at Guadalcanal in April of 1943 possessed the combat radius to intercept him. The Grumman Wildcat could not reach him. The Vought Corsair could not reach him. The Curtiss Warhawk could not reach him. Only the P-38, fitted with two 330-gallon external drop tanks and flown by pilots who accepted the risk of running dry over open ocean on the return leg, could physically make the intercept at all. The mission fell to the 339th Fighter Squadron of the 13th Air Force. 16 P-38s launched from Cookham Field on Guadalcanal at 7:25 in the morning of April 18th. They flew the entire outbound leg at 50 feet above the waves to stay under Japanese radar coverage, holding radio silence, navigating by wristwatch and compass alone. 2 of the 16 aborted with mechanical trouble in the first hour. The remaining 14 arrived at the intercept point exactly 1 minute before Yamamoto's formation appeared over the horizon at 9:34. 4 Lightnings designated as the attack element climbed and engaged the bombers directly. The other 10 climbed higher and engaged the Zero escorts. The whole engagement lasted less than 4 minutes. Which of the 4 American pilots in the attack element actually killed Yamamoto has been argued about for more than 80 years. Captain Thomas Lanphier claimed the credit that afternoon and held to that claim until his death in 1987. First Lieutenant Rex Barber quietly maintained across the same decades that the fatal burst had come from his guns, not Lanphier's, and modern forensic analysis of the wreckage of Yamamoto's Betty bomber, recovered from the Bougainville jungle in 1972, supports Barber's account. What is not disputed is what the operation demonstrated. An American fighter aircraft had just flown roughly 1,000 miles round trip, arrived at a specific point over open Pacific water at a specific minute, and killed the commander of the Imperial Japanese Navy in the middle of what the Japanese themselves had considered secure airspace. No other fighter aircraft in the world in 1943 could have done any single piece of that. The Lightning did the entire operation as a matter of routine physics. By the time the war ended, the 2 highest-scoring American fighter pilots of any conflict in history both flew P-38s and both scored every one of their victories in that aircraft. Major Richard Bong, a farm boy from Poplar, Wisconsin, who had learned to fly in a Piper Cub before the war, finished his combat career with 40 confirmed aerial victories, every one of them in a Lightning, and received the Medal of Honor from General Douglas MacArthur in person in December of 1944. Major Thomas McGuire, a New Jersey native 2 years younger, finished with 38 confirmed victories in the same aircraft and died in January of 1945 attempting a low-altitude turn to save a wingman under attack near the Philippines. Between the 2 of them, they accounted for 78 enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, a figure exceeding the combined lifetime total of every American ace of the First World War put together. Both men flew the same aircraft. Both men survived engagements that killed the pilots around them because the aircraft they were flying tolerated damage in a way no single-engine fighter could. And in the summer of 1944, an aviation consultant named Charles Lindbergh, who had held no military commission and no combat status of any kind, flew 50 documented combat missions over the Southwest Pacific in a P-38, technically as a civilian observer, and personally demonstrated to American squadron commanders that by leaning the engine mixture and reducing propeller RPM in cruise, the aircraft's combat radius could be pushed nearly 400 miles past its published limit. Squadrons that adopted Lindbergh's technique began arriving over Japanese airfields hundreds of miles from where the Japanese defenders believed any American fighter could possibly reach them. Step back for a moment and consider the whole picture from the seat of a Japanese Zero pilot in the summer of 1944. You have been trained inside a doctrine that assumes air combat is fought at close range by highly maneuverable single-engine fighters flown by expert pilots. You have watched, across 2 years of steady retreat, an American aircraft appear over positions no American aircraft should be able to reach, at altitudes no American aircraft should be able to hold, opening fire at ranges no American aircraft should be able to shoot from, and returning home on a single engine after taking hits that should have killed it. The nickname your countrymen have been quietly using for this aircraft for 18 months is not a professional designation. It is not tactical shorthand. It is a two-character phrase from folklore, a phrase your grandmother would have used to describe something not entirely of this world. Two-Bodied Devil. You use it because no other available language quite fits what you have seen. There is a broader lesson buried inside all of this, and it was never really a story about one aircraft. The men who dismissed the Lightning in 1939, when Lockheed rolled out the prototype, were not fools. They were experienced professional fighter pilots operating inside a doctrine that had worked for 20 years, and they judged the strange twin-boomed shape in front of them against everything that doctrine had taught them to expect. What they could not see, standing on the tarmac at Wright Field that January morning, was that the aircraft in front of them was not a fighter built to succeed inside the existing doctrine. It was a fighter built to make the existing doctrine obsolete. The men who mocked it in 1939 were, many of them, the same men who found themselves in 1944 filing after-action reports about an aircraft their own pilots refused to engage. The Japanese Navy lost Yamamoto because 16 aircraft flew 435 miles at 50 feet above the ocean and arrived at the right minute. The Luftwaffe lost superiority over the southern Mediterranean because an aircraft it could not catch could appear behind its own lines and stay there. And the men on both sides, who had once laughed at the strange American shape with two bodies, spent the rest of their professional lives explaining to whoever would listen that they had never, not really, laughed at it at all.